Beneath the ocean's shimmering veil lurks a primal ballet of instinct and survival. Shark attacks, often dramatized by myths and media, are not tales of monsters, but rare collisions between curiosity and chaos. Imagine a world where a misunderstood predator glides through ancient currents, its every move sculpted by millions of years of evolution. The moment of a shark attack isn't just a strike, it's a fleeting miscommunication between species, a glitch in nature's usually flawless rhythm. To understand shark attacks is to dive deeper into fear and fact. Here are 6 stories. On March 4, 2011, 2 Russian women, Irina Sokolov, 31, and Galina Petrova, 29, arrived in South Africa for a 3-week backpacking trip across the coastline. Both worked as freelance photographers in St. Petersburg and had met 3 years prior during a job shoot in Budapest. They shared a passion for capturing desolate places, abandoned towns, rural communities, and unspoiled coastlines. South Africa's wild coast seemed perfect. By their 10th day, they'd reached the outskirts of the Eastern Cape. They had rented a battered white Nissan pickup and driven hours off paved roads to reach Mabula Bay, an isolated cove fringed by cliffs and thick brushland. There was no cell phone service and no visible buildings in sight. They pitched their 2-person tent on the bluff and took photos of the bay from above. Locals they'd spoken to earlier in the week mentioned that fishing boats passed by in the mornings and that the area had once been considered for a surf resort, though plans were scrapped due to concerns about accessibility and wildlife. The next morning, on March 15th, they descended a narrow footpath to the beach. The sky was overcast. The tide was low. Irina noted the silence. No dogs, no children, no music. Just the rhythmic crash of waves. Around 9 a.m., they dropped their gear under a jagged rock ledge and waded into the sea. Irina went in first, waist deep, and Galina followed. Neither woman was wearing a wetsuit. They had no flotation gear. Roughly 300 meters off the shoreline, Sifo Menziwa, a 53-year-old fisherman from the nearby village of Ntabeni, was checking his crayfish traps from his wooden boat. Through binoculars, he saw the 2 figures laughing and splashing in the water. He thought it was foolish. He had fished those waters for over 30 years and never once swam more than a few feet in. He would later tell authorities that it was as if they didn't know the ocean had rules. At around 9:20 a.m., the water near the swimmers changed. Sifo noticed sudden thrashing. One of the women, he wasn't sure which, had vanished under the surface. The other screamed and tried to paddle back. Then, in one horrifying arc, a massive dorsal fin broke the water between them and dragged the second woman down. Sifo immediately radioed the Coast Guard channel. Due to the remoteness of Mabula Bay, the signal was faint and intermittent. It took over 40 minutes before responders triangulated his position. By the time a small search vessel arrived, there was nothing. No bodies, no blood, no debris, just churning water and floating seaweed. By late afternoon, as news filtered through local stations, a second fishing boat farther north near Kobonkaba Mouth caught an enormous great white shark in a long-line trap. The shark was 21 feet long, unusually large even for the species, and weighed over 2,200 kilograms. It had bitten through steel wiring and destroyed one of the bait barrels. The crew, led by commercial fisher Herman Creel, decided to bring the animal into the dock at Port St. John's, given its rare size and the growing attention around the earlier incident. Routine inspection of caught sharks was common. Marine scientists often took samples of stomach contents, especially for larger specimens. That evening, at around 8 p.m., Dr. Makoma Ndlovu, a researcher with the South African Institute for Marine Life Studies, conducted a dissection with 2 assistants. The shark's stomach was distended, its tissue bloated. Inside they found remains: a partial human thigh with recognizable tattoo ink, a torn neoprene strap from a waterproof camera harness, and fragments of skin bearing clear human fingerprints. Later, deoxyribonucleic acid testing matched the thigh to Galina Petrova. The second set of remains, a nearly intact forearm and part of a rib cage, were confirmed to belong to Irina Sokolov. Forensic analysis confirmed the bodies had not been dead long. Predation occurred within hours, possibly even minutes, of the initial attack. The discovery sparked a storm of debate in the region. Officials issued temporary closures of beaches across the wild coast. Public commentary split into 2 camps. Some blamed the tourists for recklessness, others pointed fingers at inadequate warnings and poor marine monitoring. Marine biologist Jean-Louis Herbst, who had tagged sharks along that coast for years, told local papers that while great whites occasionally approached shallow waters, an attack involving two humans on the same day was extraordinarily rare. He speculated the shark may have been territorial or agitated, reacting to what it perceived as competition or intrusion. The lack of visibility in that area, paired with the time of day, created a high-risk combination. There was further controversy when an independent dive crew inspecting the area weeks later found no remaining traces of Irina and Galina's presence. No tent, no backpacks, not even the tire tracks from their rented pickup. Their vehicle was eventually located 6 kilometers inland, abandoned under a grove of camelthorn trees. Its windows were smashed, but valuables were untouched. Police ruled out foul play. Officials said it was likely moved by looters after the news broke. The Russian consulate in Cape Town retrieved the women's partial remains. Their families requested a closed repatriation with no press. Irina's brother, Sergei Sokolov, posted a short online tribute calling her a force of calm in a chaotic world. Months later, a small wooden plaque was nailed to a driftwood pole near Mabula Bay by an unknown visitor. It read simply, "The sea does not forget." Sifo Menziwa, the fisherman who witnessed the attack, stopped fishing that stretch of coast entirely. In later interviews, he said the sight of the shark dragging the women down haunted him more than anything he'd seen in decades on the water. When asked why he didn't intervene, he simply responded that there was no outrunning death when it came from below. The Eastern Cape Tourism Board halted all promotion of unpatrolled beaches following the incident. New warning signage was placed at key access points across the wild coast. The 21-foot shark was preserved and displayed at a maritime institute for educational purposes. No further sightings of sharks that size were reported in the region for years after. In August 2006, newlyweds Viktor Morozov, 33, and Yelena Dragunova, 28, from Moscow arrived at Marsa Chagra for their honeymoon. Viktor was an audio engineer, and Yelena worked in television production. Both had dived recreationally before but had no formal certification. Their plan included a beach ceremony, desert excursions, and a photo shoot capturing their wedding attire underwater, a rising trend among young Russian couples at the time. They hired local dive guide Imad Saleh and freelance photographer Zaki El-Sayed to conduct the shoot. The plan was to enter the water around 8:30 a.m. just after sunrise, when lighting conditions would be optimal. The location chosen was a shallow reef shelf that gradually dropped into deeper waters. The site was known for its gentle currents and minimal boat traffic. The couple suited up in light dive gear. Yelena in a flowing white dress modified for buoyancy, and Viktor in a white shirt and slacks over a wetsuit. Zaki directed them through various poses as he captured them floating among coral heads and shoals of fish. Everything went smoothly for the first 20 minutes. Then, at 8:54 a.m., while repositioning near a sandy plateau, Zaki noticed movement behind the couple. According to his later statement, a large tiger shark, estimated at over 4 meters, approached from the drop-off edge. At first it circled at a distance, moving slowly. Imad, monitoring from a few meters away, signaled the couple to stay calm. Viktor froze, but Yelena, mid-pose, didn't immediately see the shark. The shark's behavior shifted without clear provocation. It accelerated, turned sharply, and lunged at Yelena from below. It clamped onto her left thigh and pulled her downward violently. Bubbles and silt filled the water as Imad and Viktor rushed toward her. Viktor grabbed at her shoulders, but the shark thrashed, tearing her from his grasp and diving into deeper water. Zaki surfaced immediately to alert the support team on shore. Imad followed moments later, dragging Viktor, who had begun hyperventilating. A dive boat was dispatched from the nearby pier within 5 minutes, but by then there was no sign of Yelena. The water had cleared, but she was gone. Rescue divers searched the area for hours. Only fragments of her dress and a flipper were recovered. The shark was not seen again that day. The resort staff later recalled the chaos that followed. Tourists returned from morning dives to find a perimeter cordoned off near the dive center, and rumors spread fast. Some tourists reportedly claimed they had seen a shadow in the distance earlier that morning, while others believed the tiger shark had likely been following fishing boats. Several guests decided to cut their trips short. The resort management attempted to minimize panic, but struggled to contain the growing concern among guests. particularly after word spread that the attack had occurred during a wedding photo shoot. In interviews with Red Sea conservationists, the incident was said to have reignited long-standing debates about underwater etiquette and diver safety. Some professionals argued that wedding shoots, especially those involving long fabrics and surface-level lighting rigs, introduced unpredictable variables into marine environments. Others maintained that the shoots were harmless novelty experiences. Nonetheless, a consensus quickly emerged that more stringent pre-dive briefings and environmental awareness training should become standard practice. Zaki El-Sayed, the photographer, reportedly withdrew from underwater work for several months. In a private letter to a colleague later published online, he described how he had been haunted by the moment he saw the shark close in. He reportedly kept replaying the footage in his head, not just the visual, but the sound of the regulator air and the sudden stillness that followed. Though he had previously captured dramatic underwater scenes, he claimed that day was the first time he truly felt afraid of the sea. Victor, meanwhile, became reclusive after returning to Russia. According to his relatives, he had left his job without formal notice and began avoiding social gatherings. His wedding photos, both the underwater and traditional ones, were never printed. He had declined media requests and even refused a documentary interview years later. His parents eventually moved to a different city, hoping to provide him with a fresh start away from constant reminders. A neighbor reportedly saw him once walking around a frozen lake, staring silently into the ice for nearly an hour. Local Egyptian officials quietly modified their promotional materials for Marsa Shagra in the months following the incident. Although the site remained popular with divers, brochures ceased highlighting underwater wedding shoots, and staff were advised not to mention the attack unless specifically asked. The story became a kind of cautionary tale within the diving community, often passed along in training briefings rather than discussed in public forums. The Egyptian Coast Guard and Red Sea environmental authorities conducted a brief investigation. Zaki's underwater footage, which ended abruptly as the shark struck, was reviewed but never released to the public. Experts concluded that the shark had likely been disoriented or acting territorially, possibly provoked by the fluttering movement of fabric or the reflective equipment being used during the shoot. The tragedy resulted in temporary closures of the Marsa Shagra dive site. Informal policies were established discouraging photo shoots with flowing garments or excessive surface activity near reef drop-offs. The resort quietly issued compensation to the victim's family and updated their waiver agreements for all underwater sessions. Victor returned to Moscow within a week and avoided all public engagement. He left the television industry not long after and later relocated to Novosibirsk. A close friend claimed that he never entered the ocean again. Imad Saleh continued to work as a dive guide, but reportedly refused to conduct another wedding shoot. In a local forum post years later, he reflected that some experiences, in his words, followed a person deeper than water. No other shark-related incidents were recorded in that specific area for more than a decade following the event. Monterey Bay was one of California's most studied marine ecosystems. It was home to a variety of sea life, including elephant seals, sea lions, dolphins, and several shark species. Great white sharks, while not common near the shores, were known to roam deeper waters and hunting grounds near the Farallon Islands and Año Nuevo. In 2014, Monterey was the chosen site for a mid-budget documentary being produced by a Los Angeles-based company known for adventure-driven reenactments. With its accessible coastline and marine biodiversity, the location was seen as the ideal place to shoot a controlled dramatization of a historical shark encounter. The production, led by director Adrian Lawton, had planned a tightly choreographed reenactment involving actor and stunt diver Alex Stroud. Alex, 35, was an experienced diver with a background in underwater film work. The scene was meant to mimic a classic survival escape. He'd be flailing in the water with red-dyed corn syrup to simulate blood, acting as though wounded, while drones and underwater cameras captured dramatic angles. It was all make-believe, and the team had taken multiple precautions. Safety divers stationed around the perimeter, bait-free zones, and time limits for each underwater sequence. On the morning of September 22nd, filming began just after 9 a.m. The crew assembled on a small barge anchored roughly half a mile from shore. The weather was clear, water visibility was good, and sea traffic was minimal. Everything appeared on track. Alex performed several trial takes with no incident. The crew reviewed footage, adjusted lighting, and reset for the primary shot. At approximately 10:16 a.m., the camera rolled again. Alex splashed around, calling out as scripted, while two safety divers remained on standby behind him. Without warning, one of the divers noticed a massive shadow closing in fast from below. A 15-foot great white shark, drawn by the erratic movement and surface activity, breached through the artificial blood plume. In seconds, it clamped onto Alex's lower right leg, dragging him underwater in a violent motion that lasted less than 8 seconds. Divers reacted immediately, striking at the shark with poles while one grabbed Alex's upper body. The shark released and vanished into the depths just as quickly as it had appeared. Alex was conscious, but bleeding heavily. Crew members hauled him aboard where an emergency medic applied a tourniquet. A medical helicopter, already on standby due to filming permits, was radioed and arrived within 15 minutes. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. The bite had crushed parts of his tibia and fibula. Though surgeons were able to save his leg, he spent nearly 6 months in rehabilitation and required additional reconstructive procedures. In the days following the incident, the production was shut down indefinitely. News outlets picked up the story quickly, and footage from nearby drone cameras, though incomplete, showed the chaos that erupted when the shark surfaced. The production team faced scrutiny for attempting to simulate shark behavior in open water, despite having followed all required safety protocols. Marine biologists consulted by local authorities pointed out that great whites, especially juveniles, often investigate surface activity and may mistake irregular movement for prey even in bait-free areas. Alex later gave a controlled statement through his legal team, explaining that he did not hold the crew responsible and that everyone had done their job to the best of their ability. He emphasized the unpredictable nature of wildlife and cautioned against overconfidence in staged environments. He never returned to stunt work after the incident, instead focusing on writing a memoir about underwater filmmaking hazards. Friends claimed he struggled with sleep and exhibited symptoms consistent with trauma, although he rarely spoke about the specifics of that morning. The documentary was never completed. Adrian Lawton quietly moved on to smaller, land-based projects. The production company was not fined, but local permitting agencies implemented stricter guidelines for future marine reenactments, including expanded no-activity zones and prohibitions on blood-mimicking substances near known migration paths. In an unusual twist, a diver from a nearby scientific team working on kelp forest surveys claimed to have tagged the same shark a year later based on dorsal markings visible in drone footage. If true, the shark had continued to move through the region without further human interaction. The barge used for filming was sold within weeks, and most of the equipment was auctioned off. Crew members moved on to other projects, but several reportedly declined work involving open water afterward. A few kept in touch with Alex, who began guest speaking at film schools and dive safety seminars. In private, some of the crew members admitted that they had always known there was a sliver of risk, despite the permits, despite the protocols. One of them described how the ocean felt different that morning, unusually quiet. Another recalled how Alex had jokingly said earlier that day that if he were going to be remembered for anything, it would be that one scene. It turned out to be truer than anyone expected. To this day, the footage remains unreleased. It is stored in a locked archive owned by the production house, accessible only by legal order. Though clips occasionally resurface in speculation videos, none shows the full encounter. What remains, more than any frame or file, is the quiet understanding among that crew that the line between performance and reality, especially in the sea, is sometimes just a splash away. Gansbaai, a small coastal town in the Western Cape of South Africa, has long held a dual identity, one as a peaceful fishing village known for its tight-knit community, and the other as the unofficial capital of great white shark diving. The shark population in the area thrived due to the rich marine biodiversity and colonies of seals that populated the nearby islands. Despite the presence of these apex predators, the town had earned a relatively safe reputation for controlled shark tourism, and attacks were incredibly rare. In December 2017, two European backpackers, Clara Weiss, 26, from Linz, Austria, and Maëlle Durand, 27, from Rennes, France, were nearing the end of a 6-month trip across southern Africa. They had met in Mozambique earlier that year, during a group snorkeling tour, and quickly bonded over a mutual fascination with remote travel and marine life. Their journey had taken them through Namibia, Botswana, and Lesotho before arriving in South Africa. By the time they reached Gansbaai, it was their second-to-last stop before flying home. They had booked a stay at a small coastal lodge just outside the town center, run by a retired marine biologist. The lodge was rustic but popular with young travelers. On the evening of December 19th, after returning from a wine-tasting tour in nearby Hermanus, the women joined several other guests for a beach bonfire. The night was calm, the sky clear, and the mood festive. Locals and tourists exchanged stories over grilled fish and warm cider. One of the guests, Isabel Hartmann, a 24-year-old German national traveling solo, struck up a close rapport with Clara and Maëlle that evening. Around 11:30 p.m., after most of the crowd had dispersed, Clara suggested a swim. The tide was low, the moon full, and the ocean unusually warm for that time of year. Maëlle, always the more cautious one, hesitated at first but eventually agreed. Isabel offered to join but stayed back to finish a drink and keep an eye on their belongings. From her vantage point atop a driftwood log, she watched as Clara and Maëlle sprinted into the shallows, laughing and kicking up spray. For several minutes, all appeared normal. The women waded waist-deep, splashing around and occasionally dunking under the waves. The water was dark but calm. Then came a sudden, unmistakable shift. Isabel later told authorities that she had heard a sharp, high-pitched scream, followed by frantic splashing. Initially believing they were joking, she stood and peered out, trying to spot their silhouettes. Another scream followed, shorter, cut off. Isabel shouted their names but received no reply. She began to run toward the waterline, where she could see only one figure now, thrashing. Then that figure disappeared beneath the surface. The beach fell completely silent. She waited a moment longer before sprinting barefoot up the sandy trail toward the lodge. Her panicked cries roused the lodge owner, who immediately radioed for assistance. By the time emergency responders arrived, there was no trace of either Clara or Maëlle. At dawn, search teams combed the area. The ocean, now still and reflecting the pale sunrise, yielded only a few remnants. A torn bikini top, some strands of long brown hair tangled in kelp, and a bloodied waterproof wristwatch still ticking. Shark spotters stationed along the cliffs confirmed that great whites had been observed in the area throughout the week, including a large female estimated at over 5 meters long. Marine authorities launched a formal investigation. Based on the timing, location, and behavior observed, experts concluded that the two women had likely been taken in a double predatory incident, an event so rare that it shocked even seasoned researchers. Some speculated that the sharks may have been attracted by bioluminescent plankton stirred up during the swim, mistaking the movement and sparkle for prey. Others pointed to the depth and temperature changes that happen quickly after sundown in those waters, which can increase shark activity. The French and Austrian embassies issued coordinated statements mourning the deaths and confirming that the families had been notified. Travel advisory agencies updated their guidelines for coastal activity in South Africa, urging visitors to avoid night swimming under any circumstances. The lodge where the women stayed stopped hosting bonfires for nearly a year. A small, unmarked plaque was quietly installed near the beach trail, at the request of Clara's parents, who visited the site 6 months later. Isabel Hartmann remained in South Africa for several more weeks, cooperating with local investigators and speaking with consular staff. Friends said she struggled with survivor's guilt. In an email she later sent to Clara's brother, she expressed sorrow that she hadn't joined them, saying she sometimes believed she should have. She also described how, even after returning to Germany, she found it impossible to walk near lakes or rivers without looking twice at the surface. Local fishermen spoke with reporters under anonymity, saying they had seen more sharks than usual that season. One attributed it to shifting migration patterns, another to illegal dumping of fish waste farther down the coast. While there was no hard evidence linking those factors to the attack, speculation persisted in the region for years. The incident, though tragic, led to more rigorous signage and awareness efforts among tour operators and lodges along the Western Cape. For months, marine blogs and forums debated whether the attack had been preventable. Some argued it was a freak accident in an already volatile environment. Others insisted more warnings should have been given about swimming after dark. A well-known South African diver remarked in an op-ed that humans too often romanticized the sea without fully respecting its risks. The ocean, he said, did not grant immunity to those with good intentions. To this day, neither Clara's nor Maëlle's bodies have been recovered. What remains are pieces, objects, memories, unanswered questions, and the eerie certainty that they vanished in a place known both for its beauty and its predators. Their names occasionally surface in safety briefings at Gansbai's dive schools, not as a cautionary tale to scare, but as a reminder of the ocean's absolute indifference. Despite the time that has passed, Isabelle's account has remained consistent. In later years, when asked in an interview whether she still blamed herself, she reportedly paused, then said that she had learned that sometimes there are no warnings, no build-up, no signs, only silence before everything changes. In the summer of 2011, near the sleepy coastal town of Cedar Key, Florida, a rare confluence of weather and wildlife would leave a lasting mark on two tourists seeking isolation and adventure. Elena Kostova, a 34-year-old freelance graphic designer from Sofia, Bulgaria, and her American boyfriend, Marcus Bennett, a 36-year-old biology teacher from Asheville, North Carolina, had rented a small beachside bungalow for a week. Cedar Key, nestled on Florida's Gulf Coast, was known more for its clams and quiet sunsets than danger. The beaches were narrow and rustic, framed by marshes and dotted with mangroves. It wasn't the kind of place where people expected much excitement. The trip had been Marcus's idea. He had visited once in college and remembered it fondly as a perfect getaway. Elena, burned out from multiple projects and tight deadlines, had agreed, longing for calm. The bungalow was basic but charming, a creaky wooden structure on stilts with a porch that opened straight to the beach. It lacked Wi-Fi and cable, a feature Marcus called a blessing, though Elena remained unconvinced. By their third day, the weather had turned. Locals muttered about a storm blowing in from the Gulf, but Elena and Marcus weren't overly concerned. They had packed food and spent most of the day indoors playing cards, reading, and occasionally watching the darkening sky roll across the horizon. As the afternoon wore on, the clouds thickened and the wind picked up. Rain pelted the windows in short, angry bursts. Around 5 p.m., the downpour briefly let up. Marcus, restless, suggested a swim. Elena thought he was joking at first. The air was still humid, and thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. But the sky had lightened and the shoreline looked peaceful enough. Against her better judgment and out of sheer boredom, she agreed. They waded into the water, laughing at the absurdity of their timing. The ocean was cooler than expected, stirred by wind and early storm swell. They swam out past the first sandbar, still within sight of their bungalow. The beach was otherwise deserted. The storm had kept most people indoors. Roughly 15 minutes into their swim, the weather changed again. The sky dimmed as dark clouds reassembled overhead. Rain began falling in sheets, and the wind pushed the waves into irregular peaks. Visibility dropped. They turned to head back, but the current had shifted. As Marcus struggled to orient them toward the shore, Elena felt something brush past her leg. At first, she assumed it was seaweed, but then came the bite, a sudden crushing clamp around her calf. She screamed and thrashed, and red bloomed around her like ink in water. Marcus saw her flailing and swam to her side. The water was too murky to see clearly, but a large shadow moved just below them. Another flash of gray, then another. They were surrounded. Disoriented by the turbulent conditions and the blood in the water, at least 3 bull sharks had drawn in, their usual wariness overtaken by storm-induced agitation. One darted in again, bumping Marcus hard in the ribs but not biting. He grabbed Elena, whose leg was bleeding heavily, and began pulling her toward the beach. The current was against them. Every stroke forward cost double the effort. Lightning flashed overhead, followed by the boom of thunder. The water felt alive with movement. One shark followed them, then veered off. Another circled wide. Elena was conscious, but panicked, her breathing shallow and rapid. Marcus tried to keep her head above water while kicking furiously. Eventually, the ocean floor began to rise beneath them. They reached the shallows, and with one final push, Marcus got them both onto the wet sand. 2 beachgoers from a nearby rental house had seen them struggling and rushed over. One of them, a retired emergency medical technician named Brad, applied pressure to Elena's leg, while the other called 911. Elena had lost a lot of blood, but the bite had missed major arteries. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes and she was stabilized before being transported to a regional hospital in Gainesville. Doctors said the bite would leave scars but no permanent disability. She would walk again, though recovery would be long. The emotional toll was harder to quantify. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, barely leaving the hospital except to shower and eat. Elena later said she remembered almost every second of the attack. The bite, the water turning red, the look on Marcus's face. The ocean, once beautiful and mysterious, now filled her with a quiet dread. They returned to North Carolina after she was released. For months, they couldn't even talk about the incident without tension. Eventually, they began speaking to marine experts and therapists who helped them process the trauma. Elena never swam in the ocean again. Marcus did, but only once, and only knee-deep. The attack didn't end their relationship, but it changed it. Their bond deepened in some ways, hardened by shared fear. They learned quickly how fragile even the most peaceful settings could become under the weight of nature's unpredictability. Cedar Key was never mentioned again except in passing. The Florida Wildlife Commission later confirmed the likelihood of the bull sharks being disoriented by storm conditions and attracted by the sudden movement and blood in the water. While rare, such incidents weren't unheard of, especially during the hurricane season when visibility dropped and feeding patterns changed. To this day, neither Elena nor Marcus speaks of that swim as a mistake. Just a moment of bad timing and worse luck. A reminder that the sea, no matter how calm it may seem, always holds its own rules. In the spring of 2019, off the rugged coast of Marsa Alam, Egypt, a free-diving expedition took a near-fatal turn for a seasoned diver from Ukraine. Lena Kovalenko, 28, had arrived in the Red Sea resort town just 3 days earlier. Known for its rich coral reefs and deep blue drop-offs, Marsa Alam had long been a favorite among serious divers and underwater photographers. Located roughly 270 kilometers south of Hurghada, it remained quieter and less commercialized. The region's waters, while pristine and teeming with marine life, also held a reputation for hosting large pelagic species, including the elusive oceanic white-tip shark. Lena had been free-diving for nearly a decade. She wasn't a daredevil, more the disciplined, calculated type. Her background in marine physiology gave her a methodical approach, and she rarely strayed from her safety routines. She had joined a small group run by a local outfitter specializing in deep dives at Elphinstone Reef, a narrow underwater plateau famous for steep drop-offs and strong currents. The guides were experienced, the gear well-maintained, and safety protocols strictly enforced. On the morning of the incident, the conditions were close to ideal. The sky was clear, visibility was excellent, and the current was moderate. The dive plan was straightforward: descend in pairs, practice static breath holds at depth, and ascend in intervals. Lena had partnered with a Czech diver, Thomas Havel, who had been on several dives with her before. They'd completed 2 deep sessions that morning without issue. Trouble began after lunch. The group returned to the site for a final round of dives before calling it a day. As Lena prepared for her 3rd descent, Thomas reported ear pressure issues and opted to sit the session out. Lena, determined to log 1 more breath hold, was given the go-ahead to proceed under watch from the dive boat. A surface observer, Ahmed, was tasked with monitoring her from above. Lena executed a clean dive, reaching about 27 meters and remaining at depth for nearly 2 minutes. Upon surfacing, she signaled she was fine, took a few deep breaths, and floated on her back to recover. That's when Ahmed noticed the shape. Roughly 15 meters away, just beyond the edge of the reef wall, a large oceanic white-tip shark approached with a slow, deliberate motion. At first, it circled casually. Lena, still on her back, hadn't seen it. Ahmed shouted from the boat, but the wind and distance muffled his voice. Within seconds, the shark's behavior changed. It dropped slightly, then surged forward in a sudden, jerky burst. Lena saw the flash of white-tipped fins just as the animal closed the distance. She turned, kicked hard, but the shark lunged and struck her left shoulder with violent force. The pain was instant and searing. The shark thrashed once, then let go, possibly confused or deterred by the neoprene suit. Lena flailed and kicked, creating turbulence in the water, trying to put distance between her and the predator. From the boat, Ahmed yelled again and waved. The guide, a tall and wiry Egyptian named Samir, grabbed a long aluminum camera rig and dove in. He swam toward Lena, who was bleeding but conscious. The shark circled again, slower now. Samir reached her in time to interpose the rig between her and the shark, swinging it hard in the water to disrupt the animal's approach. Though freedivers were trained to stay calm, Lena's training clashed with her body's instinct to panic. Her breathing had already become erratic as pain and shock set in. She tried to steady herself by focusing on Samir's movement beside her, using him as a visual anchor to prevent her mind from spiraling. Every second felt elongated, as if time had been stretched by the fear pulsing through her. Lena kicked toward the boat, aided by Samir, who stayed close and continued to wave the rig defensively. The shark followed for another few seconds, then peeled off and disappeared into the blue. They pulled Lena aboard quickly. Blood had soaked the left arm of her wetsuit, and she was shaking from pain, adrenaline, or both. A pressure bandage was applied while the crew radioed for emergency medical support. She was airlifted to a private hospital in Hurghada, where doctors treated her for deep lacerations and blood loss. Surgery was required to repair muscle damage, but the wounds weren't life-threatening. As the boat returned to shore without its usual chatter, a somber quiet settled among the crew. Everyone understood how close Lena had come to becoming a tragic headline. Samir, still dripping wet, sat silently holding the camera rig, its aluminum tube slightly bent from impact. Later, he would tell his colleagues it was the first time he'd ever had to use it as a weapon rather than a tool. Doctors estimated her recovery would take months. She was discharged after 10 days, her arm in a sling and her spirit visibly bruised. Speaking to reporters later, Lena described the attack as both surreal and terrifying. The oceanic whitetip, she noted, had moved unlike anything she'd seen in hundreds of hours underwater. Experts later suggested the shark may have been provoked by unusual stimuli. Oceanic whitetips are opportunistic and bold, especially in open water. Lena's position at the surface, combined with the isolation from her group, might have triggered an investigative or predatory response. The outfitter revised its protocols after the incident. Solo dives, even brief ones, were banned. An extra safety diver was added to all future outings, and new emergency response drills were introduced. Lena, meanwhile, returned to Kiev to continue her recovery. While she didn't renounce diving altogether, she admitted to close friends that her relationship with the sea had changed. The idea of open water now carried a darker edge. She no longer trusted silence beneath the waves. Despite the trauma, she eventually wrote about her experience in a long-form blog post that gained attention in diving communities. In it, she emphasized that the ocean was never truly safe, only manageable. And even that was a temporary illusion. The scar on her shoulder remained, a physical echo of the moment she learned the ocean didn't owe her safety, only honesty.